The public inquiry into foreign interference has just released its final report. Commissioner Marie-Josée Hogue said Canada's political institutions are, in her word, robust. But she said the government has done a poor job of tackling foreign meddling. She's warning the risks are only likely to increase.
Foreign interference will never be completely eradicated, and it will always be necessary to counter it. This is even more true as the world changes and the world order seems to destabilize. Democracies around the world are under attack from all sides, and the technological resources available to malicious actors are multiplying. It will therefore be a never-ending battle.
Let's turn now to the CBC's Janice McGregor. She has been poring over this detailed multi-volume report. So Janice, now that you've had a little more time to look into it, what are your key takeaways so far?
Yeah, I'm going to be clear. This is a 7-volume doorstopper, 800 pages. This is just the executive summary book. So look, we're not all through it yet, I admit. If there is something to take comfort from in terms of what we've reviewed so far, it's that to this point, we have not had an example of an election where the result was skewed, or a specific parliamentarian who is under the thrall of a foreign government, or a specific law or regulation that a hostile foreign state has dictated according to its wishes. That so far, the system is held, our democracy is intact, we remain sovereign. These are all good things. But I think the question is this just a case of foreign interference not being a huge problem yet? Because if there's something that's really clear in the way Marie-Josée Hogue has put things, it's that there is much that remains to be done to improve Canada's capacity to deal with these threats. And this problem is only going to get worse and come from more actors than perhaps in the past 2 elections. With respect to the specific kind of banner headlines that we have been talking about for months now, I'm just going to go through what she said, in particular about the NSICOP report. This was the report by that special committee of parliamentarians. Their bombshell report last spring suggested that there were parliamentarians who wittingly or unwittingly were collaborating with hostile foreign governments. She said the consternation about that report was understandable, but it is, in her view, not something that is warranted. She said the actual facts, as she saw them in the intelligence, was not as clear-cut as that report, at least what we could know of it publicly, made it seem. She said there were no individuals named in that report. And remember, different people who saw the classified version of that report, Elizabeth May comes to mind, did also say that. Other people disputed that. The Justice today saying, no, there is no list that can be revealed. And she also went over other ways, though, where sort of, yes, there was some problematic behavior, yes, maybe questionable ethics on the part of certain parliamentarians, but indeed, no, it was not sort of this report full of treason that some people had represented it to be. Take a listen.
Nor have I seen any evidence to suggest that there are currently so-called traitors in Parliament. While I saw evidence of some concerning behavior, the evidence does not show any MPs plotting with foreign states against Canada's interests.
Indeed, if there's a clear takeaway from that, it's the need to take greater care. She said there were inaccuracies in the intelligence. There were inaccuracies in the way the parliamentarians who wrote that report perceived and portrayed what the evidence said, their descriptions of it. The other thing that I know I was watching for in this report, again, in light of some explosive headlines that we've had to do with the manipulation alleged of past Conservative leadership races. Of course, we are in an atmosphere where opposition leader Pierre Poilievre has declined to get security clearance to see anything for himself. And I'll note that one of the key recommendations from this report is that all leaders do have that clearance so they can obtain the information they need to know. This report talks about how the government of India did interfere in that race, but that there was no reason candidates would have been aware of that not all of India's activities were covert, but also that the intelligence officials who spoke to her had no recollection of this being briefed to the political level. So it is possible, perhaps, that no politicians ever knew about this. Of course, there have been briefings since. And there was that other, particularly in the words of the Prime Minister, explosive detail that his security advisors brought to him with respect to opposition politicians, that he turned over to his officials to figure out how to deal with. There is no indication, unfortunately, in this report what that explosive information was concerning Conservative politicians and foreign interference. I guess it must be classified, but it doesn't tell us what that was. Only makes, again, reference to the need for Conservatives to be able to be cleared to be briefed on it.
That's kind of interesting. So just to clear up on that, she just said she had nothing to say about that, or we just don't know whether it's classified, or she didn't see anything with regard to that?
Well, I think what we most want to know is what the Prime Minister was talking about.
Yeah.
What was this explosive information that his security advisor brought to him with respect to opposition politicians? There is no answer for that in this report. It just says that direction was given to tell the Conservatives what they could, acknowledging that they could tell them more if the leader had security clearance, and acknowledging that although his chief of staff has security clearance, ultimately the chief of staff is not the accountable one for certain critical decisions. And again, the view of this inquiry report is that it is better if a leader is briefed. Mr. Poilievre, to this point, has not wanted to do that.
Okay, thank you for helping me kind of understand that more. Now there are 51
No
recommendations.
problem. It's confusing.
Right, yeah, it's just trying to, it's hard to know what you don't know and all of that. There are 51 recommendations in this report, but we're almost in an election. So do they come too late, Janice?
Well, that is really the question. I will say that she has gone through, Justice Hogue, and marked the highest priority recommendations, and not all of them require legislation to put in place. Indeed, we know that some agencies' officials are already working on some of this stuff, so that could be the good news in a way. But there are a number of specific changes to the Elections Act that are proposed here, including some brought forward by elections officials themselves that they suggested they wanted, powers they wanted. It's things like including nomination races and leadership contests under the umbrella of some of these other rules. Also looking at third-party financing, making sure you couldn't have foreign sources for that. Also talking about manipulated images, prohibiting that under elections rules, increasing penalties for Elections Act violations. So the stakes are higher for anyone who would try to meddle with a future election. But all those changes could only be made if parliamentarians themselves, when the House comes back from the prorogation of Parliament, decide to make it a priority to pass these things toot sweet before we are into an election campaign. Otherwise, the next election will be run under old rules. None of these proposals would be in place. I will say, just because a law has passed doesn't mean everything is in place and ready to go. For example, the law, we got royal assent on setting up a foreign influence transparency registry last June. The government never appointed a commissioner. That work hasn't got it in place in time. But on the other hand, individual entities themselves can decide to take action. And I think the best example of that, in the wake of condemnation at this inquiry for the Liberal Party rules that were electing people who weren't permanent residents or citizens vote in their leadership selection processes, the party, as we've seen in recent weeks, did reverse itself, change that rule. People who are not citizens or permanent residents are not allowed to pick the next prime minister. So you might say all the transparency and forced accountability of this inquiry process has already had some effects.
Janice, thank you. That is the CBC's Janice McGregor live in Ottawa.